Please welcome Troy Gardner.
Good morning, everybody. So we're going to talk about ways to get better, easier coffee, which I'm sure that most of the people here are familiar with. So the presentation is roughly about 5 different parts. First, we're going to talk about what coffee is so we can understand what good coffee is versus bad coffee. Then we're going to talk about why we drink it, the effects. So we don't drink it for just random. We could drink water if we want to. So we drink coffee for particular reasons. Then we're going to talk about my recommendations for how to get the best coffee in the most convenient fashion, which involves don't brew if you don't have to. And then we're going to talk about scheduling, dosing, and then if you do want to brew it, what my suggestions are there. So the first thing, what is coffee? Coffee starts out as like a shrub-like plant, and on it, it produces these fragrant floral flowers that look like jasmine. The jasmine produces these red cherries that are about 1 inch long, and they produce small green coffee seeds. We call it coffee beans, but they're technically a seed. Have you guys ever seen, how many people have seen green coffee? All right. Have you guys not seen green coffee before? All right. This green coffee is nature's way of preserving and passing on the species of the tree. This coffee bean could last for hundreds of years and still be consumable. They've actually found coffee in pharaohs' tombs and still drinkable 100 years later, or hundreds of years later. Since it's not edible, what we do is we roast it. And roasting it creates this explosion of flavors. I don't know if you can see this from the distance, but on here we have floral, berry, dried fruits, other fruits, citrus fruits, pretty much every fruit possible. We have sugars, we have cocoa, nuts, brown spice, cereals, burnt. There are 1,000 different compounds that come into existence when coffee is roasted. And those thousands of components interact with themselves in a never-ending dance till the point it goes stale. They interact with the water to form the compounds that you taste. They interact with the air to form the compounds you smell, and they interact with your brewer and your filter to the stuff that you throw away. And by optimizing that brew, the grind process, the growing process of these seeds, we produce the compounds that produce the effect of the enjoyment of the experience and also the effects that we feel like caffeine. Now, coffee isn't just one thing. There are hundreds of different varieties of coffee, and depending on how they're grown, they can be from crap coffee to amazing coffee. Unfortunately, most of the coffee that we get to experience in the store is crap coffee. It's designed to meet the needs of an industrialized society and produced at the most quantity at the least cost possible. Where a lot of the premium coffees are just like, think of like an apple, right? There's dozens of different types of apples. They have red delicious, we have green tart apples. Coffee is the exact same way. There are thousands of coffees produced all around the world that have different flavor profiles. Most of us don't get a chance to experience because it doesn't survive that mass-produced fashion. So why do we drink coffee? And I think there's 2 primary areas that we drink coffee. One is what I call the commodity version of coffee, the gulp and swallow version, where it's 2 a.m. in the morning, we've got another hour worth of work, we have to get through that job and drive the way home, so we consume as much as we can, we don't care how it is, we're just gulping it. And the other one is the sip and savor, which we get to experience with friends when we go out to see them. When we're scheduling a special time in our day, go to a special cafe, we want to enjoy every moment of that experience. So there we'll get access to typically fresher roasted coffee, ones that have been optimally roasted, optimally brewed, and optimally grinded. Now the step from when you get these coffee beans, there's about 10 different ways you can roast this. And that goes from completely undrinkable, like this is just raw. If you were to chew this on yourself, you would crunch, you wouldn't be able to actually consume it, say it's raw. It goes from when you're roasting it to a hay-like smell, and then eventually these flavors come into being. And as it goes farther and farther along, those start to decline, it forms caramelization, similar to how we toast bread or we roast barbecues. Those are the roasted flavors. And if we keep on going even longer and longer, we get into darker roast territory, it becomes more and more like charcoal. So between hay and charcoal are about 12 different zones, and only about 2 of them are typically appropriate for any particular type of seed. Once we have that, we have to optimally grind it and brew it. And this is, most of us are here are probably familiar with 2 forms. There's espresso and like drip-based drinks. And those are completely separate in how they're perceived and how they're brewed. All coffee brewing involves water and coffee, but how we grind it and how we brew it makes a huge difference in what percentage of these components actually make it out and how syrupy they are. So drip profiles, we use a very coarse grind. We use boiling temperature water and a fairly long extraction, like about 2 minutes or so. Espresso, on the other hand, is very, very powdery grinded. We use very high pressure for a very short period of time, like 23 seconds or so, to extract a very syrupy cup. You can measure coffee effectiveness or how strong coffee is by something that's called refractometer. Refractometer just takes light, bends it by how syrupy the concept the water is, and outputs a value. So if we start out with water at 0, most drip coffee is about 98% water. You'll get 1.6 on the scale. Espresso is typically 5 to 12 bricks. It depends on where you go. Every place produces espresso in a slightly different way. That is a whole continuum of coffee, but most coffee actually goes beyond that. If you can get ristretto, which is actually a shortened version of espresso, you can even twice as the strength of espresso. And in between, we're saying like 15 bricks, 12 bricks versus 1.6 bricks. Espresso is 10 times more syrupy than the type of stuff that you normally get in a drip-based system. There's a whole range of potential flavors that you can get in between that we don't have names for. So the second reason why we drink coffee, well, the commodity side is from both the caffeine and the calories perspective. The caffeine is the most active component in coffee, which gives it its mental effects, which allows us to actually, why we typically use it to normalize ourselves and also for optimal performance. And my suggestions there for many people who don't know it, like we all process caffeine differently. If you go to a place like 23andMe, which is a genetic testing, you can actually get tested to figure out whether you're a slow metabolizer or a fast metabolizer. And what that means practically is like a slow metabolizer can have coffee up till 2 p.m. in the afternoon, but if they're going to bed at 10 p.m., they can't have coffee past 2 p.m. because they'll keep them up. Fast metabolizers can drink coffee right before they go to bed pretty much and not have any ill effects. And to get the optimal dose of it, you have to know what your caffeine dosage is. And that's one of the reasons why I'm going to suggest you play with it for a week. Try using black coffee. We'll talk a little bit more about dosing in a little bit. Find your optimal dose, because too little, you don't feel anything. Too much, you get anxiety, you get sweaty, you get thoughts that just go too fast, speaking too fast. And right in that center is the optimal dose. The other aspect of caffeine as a drug, as a dosing, is you can't have it all the time. So if you're drinking coffee all the time throughout the day, then you're going to actually have less effect the next day. So at the end of the week, caffeine doesn't work for you at all. So it's better to have optimal dose in the smallest package possible first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, because that produces the highest elevation of the caffeine in your bloodstream to produce that effect. The way that caffeine works in the bloodstream is a lot like a light switch. If you imagine that here's 0 and here's the 100% level that could be in your bloodstream, you need to have a certain threshold like a light switch here. It doesn't matter if you take that light switch and go as fast or go super slow. When it crosses that threshold, the light turns on. And caffeine is the same way in your bloodstream. So the optimal way to get caffeine in your bloodstream is to take it in your mouth, something about this size, like an empty, first thing in the morning. This is just black cold brew concentrate. We'll talk about more in a second. If you hold it in your mouth for about 30 seconds, it starts absorbing through the tongue and cheek lining and hitting your bloodstream pretty much instantaneously. A small amount of caffeine delivered in you start feeling effects between 5 to 10 minutes later, and if you swallow it, then you'll have effects up to an hour long. What that does is create a very sharp spike, so that light switch hits that threshold, and then you don't need any more caffeine typically to feel the light bulbs coming on. So the optimal flavor profile is typically the opposite of that. You want to sip and savor it, and that gets back into some of the nuances of roasting and grinding. One of the secrets about coffee is pretty much everything that you buy at the store has been there because to serve the needs of producing lots and lots of it by the tons. Starbucks uses so much coffee, they buy coffee in the future, they don't even know what it tastes like. They buy it by the boatfuls. That is not the best way to consume coffee. When you roast coffee, it's a lot like fresh bread. How many people have had fresh bread right out of the oven? All right. How many people have had left that bread out for a day or so? How does it taste after a day? It's kind of, Same thing happens with coffee. This may look solid, but once it's roasted, it's a lot like a helium balloon. It's actually about 30% of the compounds we see on this thing are gaseous or volatiles. They like to escape into the atmosphere just like helium escapes from a balloon. So that party balloon, its birthday, a week later it's going to be completely flat. So the optimal time to drink coffee was within a week, ideally within 24 to 48 hours. And in past that, it's always on a straight decline down. Everything that you get at the store, grocery store, is at least a couple weeks old, more likely a month. And instant freeze-dried coffee can be up to years long old. That means it's completely dead, completely stale. And the experiences you get is the difference between like a 1080p projector like this versus a 4K or 8K TV, because the flavors that are in that freshness are amazing, they're nuanced, they're complex, and they don't exist in store-bought coffee. Almost every store-bought coffee you see has a one-way valve. And since these are gaseous things that like to evaporate, that's their exit door. It doesn't stop them. There's nothing we can do. There's no packaging system yet devised that can actually take coffee and make it preserve longer, those particular fragile aromatics, because they like the gas off. Anyway, so my suggestions as far as coffee involves cold brew concentrate. And you can either make this yourself or buy it from the store. And I'm going to suggest you buy it from the store because it's typically easier. If you go to a place like Target or Whole Foods and you go to the juice section, you're going to find bottles towards the bottom that look like this. It is cold brew concentrate, and this one says 3 times concentrate, which means that for 1 dose of it, you typically add 2 parts water or 2 parts milk. There's several reasons why this is kind of cool. If I were to go to the store and buy this today, I could consume this. It will stay fresh in your freezer or refrigerator for about at least 3 weeks. That means you don't have to brew coffee every day. You pour it and go. So how I consume it typically, if you were like here last night, you would probably take it in this fashion. It's an energy shot. You would take it just straight. There's enough caffeine in here. It has more caffeine than typically an energy shot. If you hold it in your tongue, you don't need as much caffeine. We talked about that earlier about optimizing the bloodstream delivery. Hold it for 30 seconds. You're going to get the actual effects of caffeine without having a lot of it. Versus like if I were to take coffee in the morning and I mix it with food and I mix it with cream and sugar, that entire food mass is slowing caffeine down. We talked about before like a 0 to 100 level. As caffeine is mixing with your food, it's taking a lot longer to hit your bloodstream, so you'll never hit that threshold. Or it'll take a lot longer and you won't get the same spike. So if you're in a hurry, you can just take one of these straight. And coffee can be consumed at pretty much any temperature. It's like milk. It doesn't have to be hot, doesn't have to be cold, doesn't have to be iced. It's drinkable straight any way you want to do it. If you want to have a little more time in the morning, you could actually just toss this in the microwave and you get a hot espresso shot. It takes less than 20 seconds to get something warm. Or if you're more finicky, you can put it on the stove like a double burner. If you want to make it Americano, since this is concentrated, what you do is you heat up milk or water in the microwave or stove, and then just pour the shot into it after you froth it. That takes less than a minute or 2. So typically what I do is I have a hot water kettle, put the hot water on, go brush my teeth, check my Facebook, come back, the water's boiling, mix it up, put it in the cup, and I'm on the road. The other advantage of using concentrates is there aren't any grounds, there aren't any fines, there aren't any filters, there aren't any coffee pots, they're just the way you heat water in your favorite cup. So it makes life a lot simpler. If you want to do it with milk, of course, it's the exact same thing. Just heat up some milk and go. If you want to make iced coffee, same thing. Crush up some ice, pour this over it, maybe add some whipping cream, really easy. The other advantage is when you go to work, you can take a bottle of this with you to work, and if you've got 5 minutes before the next meeting, the same thing. Just take a cup of this, down it, with 5 minutes between your next meeting. If you want something like soda, take some carbonated water, toss this in there, you have a coffee soda. It's got the caffeine, it's got the flavor that's not water. You can add whatever sugar you want. You can add whipping cream to have an Italian type soda. If it's after lunch, you want a special treat, you get a scoop of ice cream and pour one of these shots over it and you get something called affogato. And affogato makes your stomach happy because it's dense calories versus like getting the same, if you go to Starbucks, a Frappuccino has 410 calories. It's more calories than a milkshake and it's the equivalent of 2 candy bars. And it's got a lot of water in it, which makes it harder to digest. And it's also crap milk. It's designed to be the bottom barrel they can produce the most of versus like a premium grade Haagen-Dazs or Ben & Jerry's or whatever you prefer ice cream-wise. The other tip you can use for strategy-wise is called a caffeine nap. A small shot of this, when you're hitting that siesta post-lunchtime, what you do is schedule out 11 to 20-minute time period and then take one of these shots in your mouth, hold it there for 30 seconds, swallow it, and then immediately go for that caffeine or the nap for 20 minutes. While you're going down, you're not going too far down, so you're not going to be groggy and you wake up. The caffeine is working its magic, and you come up and you have a second wind. Your afternoon's going to be even more productive than your mornings. That's my recommended dose, way of taking it. To actually brew it yourself isn't that hard. I'm going to try to keep this short because we're running out of time today. Coffee is just coffee and water. There are a lot of videos on YouTube on how to cold brew coffee. Add water, add as much coffee as you want. The important thing is to get that fresh roasted coffee and find good coffee to begin with. My suggestion there is go to a place like coffeereview.com, which actually reviews coffees. And a lot of these micro roasters submit their coffees to places like Coffee Review, so you can actually find these premium grade coffees. And there's a huge, huge difference. Like everything at the store you're ever going to experience, no matter if it was a perfect coffee when it was first roasted, after it's been sitting on the shelf for 2 weeks, is going to be an 85 on a scale of 100 at best. With these, you can get like a 94 grade. And these fresh roasters, these people are super passionate people. They'll spend months trying to find the perfect coffee. They will cup 10 different cups at a time to figure out the optimal roast profile. And they will mail you the fresh roasted coffee at the same price or less cost than you would get at the store typically. That's my first suggestion. The second is brew a bag at a time. We talked about a bag is like a loaf of bread and it's going to decay quickly. You can't stop that process when it's a bag, but you can stop it once it's brewed. Once it's in the water, it's in the refrigerator, it's a perfect way to store it. We talked about that bottle can last 3 weeks. That's true for the coffee you make yourself as well. The second is try to grind it as fine as you can. The efficiency of coffee, like through a pour over, is really, really poor. But if you leave it in the refrigerator for a long period of time, like 12, 24 hours, you can get more out of it because it's having longer contact time. The finer you grind it, the more surface area is exposed, so this natural sugars can come out and you can taste the nuances and get more of the sweetness without the bitter stuff. Don't add more water. What's not really known about coffee is adding more water doesn't actually get you more coffee. It gets the bitterest components of coffee. There's a process called selective diffusion where certain components of coffee come out first, and these are the sweetest, most succulent parts of coffee that we want. And the longer you go, the more we get towards the bitter, acrid, acidic parts. So by using more coffee and less water, we get that narrow part that we want without the bitter point. And again, I talked about the espresso. If you get to that cold brew concentrate, just grind as fine as you can. Play with the brew time, because it makes a difference between 12 hours and 24 hours. Figure out what you like the best. Try to find the best filter that you can, because the fines are one of the most reasons why they end up being bitter. Get a couple of different bags from a couple of different species. We talked about the differences in apples. The same thing is true for coffee. So you have a couple of bottles of these cold brew concentrate, either in your freezer or in your refrigerator, that you brew a bag at a time. You have coffee for weeks or months, conveniently, pour and go. Your routine in your mornings has gotten down to a couple minutes at best. There's no grinds, there's no filters, there's no coffee pot necessary. And that's my suggestions for cold brew. If you're going to do hot brew, my suggestions are a little bit different. You can batch brew hot brew as well. And what you can do is use a progressive temperature extraction, which means you use like 100 degrees, like a quarter cup, then you use 120 degrees, then 140 degrees, 160 degrees, 180 degrees. And what happens is you're extracting these temperature components without burning them on the way out. Typically using by 200 degrees, we burn the hell out of the stuff. It decomposes in the bitter stuff, it drives off the aromatics, and it oxidizes pretty quickly because you're cooking under high temperature. And also what you should try doing is quenching it with ice. There's a look on video on YouTube called Japanese ice over method. You're pouring hot water and you're instantly quenching it, which captures the aromatics and it ends up in the stuff you drink rather than stuff you smell, and that produces a fresh, clean cup. We have coffee here that I've been producing somewhere around here. Let's look for the robot. It's you can see on the corner there. If any questions, come up and see me afterwards. Thank you.